New Testament verses that have to do with Daniel chapter 7. And we'll elaborate. We've looked at Mark 10:45 talking about Isaiah, but can somebody read Mark 10:45 for us? And we'll come back to talking about that once we get into Daniel 7, but just to see just Jesus's self-reference. What does he call himself? What does he say his mission is to do? Yeah, Melissa.
For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Okay, so what is, and I mentioned this to you guys last week, and you guys were already aware of this, what is the most common title Jesus calls himself? You know, yeah. Son of Man. So we looked at Mark 10:45 and also the same similar passage in Matthew 20:28, where Jesus says his role is to come as not to be served, but to serve in giving his life a ransom for many. We connected it with Isaiah. But he's also connecting it with his name, his role, with Daniel chapter 7, the Son of Man vision. And so Jesus will often call himself the Son of Man. Okay? And that's going to be highly important for Jesus' understanding of who he is, what his mission is. But we're going to see this verse that Jesus says is going to be confusing for the disciples, because they're not going to understand what Jesus is going to say. They're like, well, wait a second, that doesn't seem to fit with what Jesus says is going on, okay, or what is going on in that passage, okay. So, and then can somebody read? This is Jesus's questioning before the night before he's crucified. This is when he's questioned by the Jewish leaders, religious leaders. Can someone read Mark 14:61 and 62? This is where they charge Jesus with blasphemy. Somebody get that one? Yeah, Marcus, thank you.
But he kept silent and did not answer. Again, the high priest was questioning him and saying to him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus said, "I am, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." Okay. Now, Jesus says a lot there in that simple sentence, and their reaction is they tear their robes and say, "He said it now. He's blasphemed." Jesus says a couple of things where he's quoting or referencing Old Testament scriptures for saying, who is it that you're claiming to be here in Mark 14:61, 62. And what's the first thing that he says? Notice the first two words that Jesus answers there. Are you the Son of the Blessed One? He says what? I am, yeah. So it's not just John, and sometimes we skip over this, but Jesus says here, I am, which is, this is a statement of being God. This is what God says himself, going back to Exodus. This is what God says in Isaiah 40 through 48. And then he says, and you shall see, he blends a few scriptures together, which it actually makes sense in the context. You shall see the Son of Man. First, he says, seated at the right hand of God. Okay, that's Psalm 110:1, which is what, the Messianic Psalm. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. This is the Messiah's reign. So Jesus says, this is me. God is going to give me the rule at his right hand, which is a place of equal power and authority and status. Meaning, so if you sit next to God like this, like Jesus does, it's a place of equality. And then what does he say? How does Jesus say that they will see him arriving? With the clouds. That's an important one, because that's going to be in Daniel 7:13. You'll see me coming on the clouds. Okay, and that's Daniel 7:13.
And I've done a whole study on this, of every usage of the word clouds in the Old Testament. And sometimes they're referring to clouds like mist or like the clouds outside or rain and stuff like that. But when clouds show up like this in a supernatural way, only God shows up on the clouds. In Exodus 19, when God comes on the mountain and gives the law, he comes on the clouds. In Isaiah and in the Psalms, God talks about riding on the clouds to save his people or to act in some sort of way. And so in Daniel 7:13, it talks about the one like a son of man, the Messiah, arriving on the clouds to receive the kingdom from God. Only God shows up on the clouds. Therefore, if Jesus is claiming to be this individual from Daniel 7, he is claiming to be God. Okay, so we will see that, and so that's why they accuse Jesus of blasphemy. So let's go back now to Daniel 7 and see the passage from the Old Testament itself. So now we get to what is the most important vision of the book, and it's put into basically the center, which is in the Bible when you organize material, a lot of times the most important thing will be the core. It'll be the center. Okay, so they'll organize everything else around it. So we've seen Daniel with the stories that Daniel lays out. He interprets Nebuchadnezzar's vision. God humbles kings. God showing his kingdom and his sovereignty. Daniel survives the lion's den because he worships only God. Things like this. But now we get to the vision of God's kingdom overcoming the kingdoms of the earth, which is going to be like the vision in Daniel 2 with the statue that gets crushed by the stone, right? Which is God's kingdom that then fills the earth. So look at Daniel 7:1. Daniel writes, he says, so he tells us when these visions are. They don't all happen in the same order in Daniel's life. He says, in the first year of Belshazzar. So this is back some time when Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's son, is still king. King of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream in the visions of his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and relating it as follows. And he said, Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And out of the and 4 great beasts were coming out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion, which had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking, and its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a human mind was also given to it. And behold, another beast, the second one resembling a bear, and it was raised up on the side. 3 ribs were between its teeth, and they said to it, arise and devour much meat. And I kept looking, and behold, another one, a leopard, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird, and a beast with 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and there was a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth, and it devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder of its feet. It was different from all the beasts before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little horn, came up along them, and the 3 first horns were pulled out by the roots, and behold, this horn possessed eyes of a man and was uttering great boasts or great blasphemies. Okay, so a lot going on in this vision. If you look on Google Classroom, I posted some resources for Daniel. I also posted some pictures of this vision in Daniel 7. So, and Daniel will interpret this for us. He tells us what these mean. But in the vision, we get 4 beasts, okay, which are going to correspond to 4 kingdoms, more specifically their leaders, 4 kings. Okay, so we've seen this type of vision before, right, with Daniel chapter 2, the statue with the 4 types of metal, right, that are each kingdom leading into the next kingdom. Okay, and so then remember, there's Genesis language here as the kingdoms of the world that are disobedient to God are portrayed as animals, as beasts. But God is going to send the one like a son of man, like Adam, to go and rule over these kingdoms, to have this dominion, like Adam had, but lost, in a sense, in the fall. Okay, so what are these? I have a hard time saying that it's a lion, a bear, a leopard, because they say like a lion, like a bear, because it's a lion with wings, or it's a leopard with 4 heads, and this type of stuff. But these 4 kingdoms, can you identify what they are? The lion is what? What's the kind of first kingdom? It also goes along with the head of gold. What's the kingdom that's on the scene at that time? Yeah, Jonathan? Babylon, okay. To be followed by and conquered by the bear that's going to eat these 3 ribs. You guys know what the bear is going to be? What's the next kingdom that's going to come that overcomes Babylon? It's going to be the kingdom that's in place with Cyrus and when Esther is living there. Yeah? Medo-Persia. Very good. Okay, and the 3 ribs, Daniel will explain, are the crushing of these 3 areas. So there's which actually happened later on in history. Okay, and then we haven't talked too much about this yet. But what is the kingdom that overcomes Medo-Persia? It's prior to Rome. It's this very famous guy in history known as a great conqueror who basically conquers the known world at that time. Yeah, you know? Alexander the Great and Greece, right? The Greco Empire, the Greco, and then leads into Rome. Okay, so we have that, Greece, and we get actually quite a bit about Greece and Alexander the Great. Okay, and that is, forgot to put the animal. That's the leopard, and it has 4 heads. Historically, do you guys know why? You guys know what happens? Alexander the Great was a very effective conqueror, but he did not plan really for the future after he died. He died at like 33. And do you guys know what happened in history to his kingdom after he died? Yeah. Got split into 4. Daniel 8 will talk about this. Daniel 7 will talk about this. I believe Daniel 11 will talk about this as well. Hundreds of years in advance, they'll say that the kingdom will be split into 4. So it's going to have this kind of 4-part expression afterward. And then what's the next kingdom? The Iron Kingdom, or this beast that's kind of described. What comes after Greece? It's the kingdom on the scene when Jesus comes into the world. Yeah. Rome. Yeah, and so Rome is going to have an expression when Jesus comes into the world, but it's also going to be this, it's this 4th beast with these iron teeth. You guys remember the iron legs and feet, and then the iron mixed with clay, and it's going to have the 10 horns, and then the single horn, right? So this horn is identified as the king of that kingdom, or often is identified as the final kingdom that will stand against God, the Antichrist kingdom. Okay, so that will be an expression again of Rome. Okay, so Rome had an expression on the earth during the time of Jesus, but it will have a kind of mixed kingdom that's a 10-part kingdom later on. Okay, now that we've set that up, there's these beasts coming out of the sea who are these violent animals, and now they are going to be basically brought to an end by the coming of the one like a son of man. Okay, so let's look at now the key scene here that's set up. I'll read this part, but then we'll look at somebody reading Daniel 7, 13, 14. So it talks about God on his throne. He calls him the Ancient of Days. Look at Daniel 7, 9. It says, I kept looking until thrones were set up. So this is God's heavenly court. And the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and his hair was like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. Okay, just real quick. Remember from Ezekiel, God's throne, and here in Daniel 7, 9, God's throne is unique because it has something that no other throne has. Do you guys know what that is? What did Ezekiel's vision and Daniel's here that God's throne had that others' thrones did not? Melissa, do you know? Wheels. Yeah, God's throne is mobile. Remember, it can move. And so when you have the wheels on the throne, you're kind of getting the idea that this is kind of a different version of what Ezekiel saw or what Isaiah saw. Okay, then, and so God is depicted as this ancient man in kind of glory here in this vision. And then 7:10 says a river was flowing and coming out from before him, a river of fire, and thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were opened. Right? It sounds like Revelation, because Revelation pulls from Daniel. Okay, so this is talking about God's judgment in his court. These myriads of angels attending him. And it says, then I kept looking because of the sounds of the boastful words of the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body was destroyed and given to burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. So all of a sudden, these beasts that are representing the kingdoms of the world that God has appointed for a certain period of time, the last beast dies, gets thrown into fire, and God brings all these kingdoms to an end. Okay, well, why? You need a king. Okay, can somebody read now Daniel 7, 13 through 14? Daniel 7, 13 through 14. Yeah, Zach, thank you.
I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he put up to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed.
Okay. A lot is packed into this little statement, but you've got to know, to know Daniel, you have to know Daniel 7, 13 through 14. This is the most important part of the most important vision, okay? Because it describes now God's king, the Messiah, the representative of his people, who he's going to be very closely tied with his people. Paul will use language from Daniel 7 to talk about union with Christ. Okay, so that's going to be important. You guys also remember when Paul is going to kill Christians before he's confronted by Christ on the road to Damascus. Jesus, do you guys remember what Jesus says to him? The question he asks Paul in Acts 9. He says, Saul, Saul, why are you what? Persecuting me. Why does he say persecuting me? Saul's not persecuting him directly. He's persecuting the church. Well, that's because Daniel 7 identifies the Messiah is tied with his people. What happens to them, he sees it as happening to him. And so Paul's going to realize, wait a second, Jesus is the Son of Man. If I persecute the saints, I persecute him. He wasn't just this blasphemer that got crucified by the Romans. He's the God in the flesh. Okay, so we'll see that here in Daniel 7. Okay, so Daniel now says, behold, we see that the Son of Man comes on, first of all, the clouds of heaven. I've already explained the significance of this. It's that only God comes in clouds, and the Babylonians also had their gods arriving on clouds in some of their literature and stuff like this. So this is a divine being. But we also see that it's not just one person. We've already seen the Ancient of Days, God seated on the throne. This other person shows up, who is also God and is not a threat. You don't have two gods here. You have two persons. You have the Ancient of Days, the one like a Son of Man. So there is that complex unity. So when we say Jesus is God, we are saying that he shares the same being, the same identity with God, but while there are different persons. Okay, so he comes on the clouds of heaven. Okay, now we need to notice something here. I've been saying that Jesus is the Son of Man, but that's not exactly what Daniel 7:13 calls this figure. It doesn't just say he's the Son of Man. Look very carefully at Daniel 7:13. It says, coming on the clouds of heaven, one blank, a Son of Man. Yeah. Like. Okay, so this isn't like... so we have one like a Son of Man. This is the language of likeness. Okay, we know that Adam and Eve are created in the Genesis 1, the image and the likeness of God. Okay, so they bear the God's image. We do too as human beings. We are in the image and likeness of God. We bear the stamp of God's nature and character, that we have that relationship with God. That's what makes humans unique, according to the Bible. But this guy is kind of the mirror opposite. It's clear that he is a human being, but it's kind of the mirror image of that. What we have here is the like a Son of Man, is we have God in the image of man. Okay? So now we have here the idea of man is created in the image and likeness of God. Now we have God coming in the likeness of the Son of Man, in the likeness of Adam. Another way to say this that Paul will say in Colossians 1 about Jesus is he will say he is the image of the invisible God. Okay, so this is Colossians 1:15 calls Jesus the image of the invisible God, which means when you see Jesus, okay, when they looked on Jesus, they saw the invisible God made visible. Okay, that's Colossians 1:15. And then Colossians also talks about that he's the uncreated creator. He created everything. That God used this individual to create everything that exists. So we have Son of Man language. So he's, in this way, he's also considered a son of Adam. Okay? But he's different. He's like a son of Adam, meaning he will be able to be the second Adam. Okay? So this one is God. He is man. But unlike Adam, he will be able to rule over God's kingdom, actually have dominion, will not sin, will not rebel against God, and will produce the kingdom of God on earth so that the glory of God, the knowledge of God, fills the whole earth, which Adam and Eve were supposed to do, but failed to do because of sin. Okay, so this guy's really significant. This is the most important individual in history that God, in fact, I'll write this down, that what we see in Daniel 7 is that God centers his plan and history, his kingdom, around his son. Okay, this person will be a son of Adam. It's That's what Son of Man means, and it's an Aramaic version of this. But he will also be one like a Son of Man, which means he will be the invisible God made visible as a human being. Okay? So this is that God is orienting everything around his Son. Colossians talks about this. Ephesians talks about this. This is where Paul is getting this from and building his theology as he understands who Jesus really is. He's saying, well, wait a second. If that's true about Jesus of Nazareth, then everything is about him. Okay, so now we see that he comes up, and in 7:13, he comes up to the Ancient of Days and is presented before him. So he comes up to God and is going to now receive the kingdom from God. Okay, so now, can somebody again read Daniel 7:14? There's some language we need to pick up on here in this chapter. Somebody reread Daniel 7:14? Sure, Melissa, thank you.
And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Okay, so a couple of things we need to notice here. So he receives the kingdom, which is going to be the lasting kingdom, but we also hear that he receives dominion. What does that remind us of, that word dominion? He's receiving dominion over the whole earth, representing God and ruling over his kingdom. Where do we hear about dominion earlier in the Bible? Yeah?
Abrahamic covenant?
Well, yes, but let's go back a little earlier. Yeah.
Creation mandate?
Creation mandate, yeah. That they're supposed to take dominion over creation. They failed to do that because of sin. Now nobody can take dominion. Psalm 8, though, says that creation is still supposed to be under the control of man. Ultimately, that comes true in this individual. So he takes dominion over the kingdom. We also see that the kingdom is, as Daniel has talked about, this kingdom, unlike all the other kingdoms, is everlasting. So we see that this person will be eternal. They will reign over the kingdom. He will reign over the kingdom forever. But now, what does it say will happen next? That after he receives dominion, glory, and a kingdom, what happens next in Daniel 7:14? And it's a phrase that I've mentioned a couple of times as we've gone through Daniel that I want us to make sure we take note of. So he receives the kingdom. How does what's the next event that takes place relative to kind of the reaction to the Son of Man? Yeah, Zach? No, you did.
That all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him.
Okay, we've heard that before, right? That now we see peoples, nations, languages. Where do we hear that earlier in Daniel? What kind of situations do we hear peoples, nations, languages in that kind of similar phrasing? Yeah.
Tower of Babel.
Well, that's true, and that's connected here. But where in Daniel? Where do we hear, let all peoples, nations, languages do this? Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar with his statue.
Yes, Nebuchadnezzar with his statue. We also hear it with Belshazzar talking about, look, I have all peoples, nations, and languages. We see it with Darius or Cyrus, with him wanting everybody just to pray to him. He says, let all the peoples, nations, and languages pray only to you, is what the idea is. So the kings throughout Daniel try to get this type of kingdom and this type of worship where all the peoples, nations, and languages worship and serve them, and they rule over them all. But God doesn't allow them to have that type of kingdom. Okay? But now, when the Son of Man comes and is given this kingdom by God, what happens worldwide is all peoples, nations, and languages come to serve him. Okay, so this is a change, a contrast to show that the other kingdoms will not have this type of dominion, but God's kingdom and the Son of Man will. He will rule over the peoples, nations, and languages. And what's kind of exciting about that is if you're a believer, I don't know who is, who isn't, but if you're a believer, we are a sample, a preview that this vision is going to happen, because we are a people, nation, language that was different than Daniel and the Jews in this time period. But if you trust in Jesus and you recognize Jesus as Savior and King, you are one of the peoples, nations, and languages that turn to the Son of Man, right? He's the one that God orients his plan of salvation around, and also his kingdom around. And then also, what do the peoples, nations, and languages, and by the way, I'll just make note of the fact that Revelation 5:9 uses the same phrase and talks about praising Jesus as the Lamb who has purchased for God a people from every tribe and tongue and nation and language. That because of Jesus' saving work as the Lamb of God, he has brought God worldwide worship, and a worldwide kingdom will take place because of his saving work. Okay? So John picks up on this and says that's a reality that's going to happen because of Jesus' work. What then next? What do the peoples, nations, and languages do in Daniel 7:14? What's the word that's used there? That all peoples, nations, and languages might what? Serve. Yeah. Okay, so remember, they now serve him. Okay, and this is in Daniel 7:14. Daniel 7:14. Does anybody have anything different in Daniel 7:14? Maybe you don't have the New American Standard. Does anybody have a different word for serve in Daniel 7:14? That all the peoples, nations, and languages might. There are different versions? Somebody had a good one it may have been the other class. But what does this word serve mean in Daniel? Remember that Daniel's friends for the fiery furnace tell Nebuchadnezzar, we will not bow down before the statue and serve you or your gods, or worship your gods. Yeah, Jonathan?
I was just going to say
Worship.
worship.
Melissa, sorry. Yeah, this word for serve in Aramaic is the idea of bowing before royalty, but it's also the idea of worship. It's used several times in Daniel, and also once in Ezra, in an Aramaic word. It's the idea to recognize, bow before in worship. So Daniel says, I only serve my God. I will not pray to the king. I will not serve the king or worship his gods. Now Daniel could serve the king in his job, but he would not serve this way. And so this version of serve, if you actually look through Daniel for the word serve, it's always connected with the idea of worship. Okay, now we have to show why Jesus says something that's confusing to the disciples. In Daniel 7:14, the Son of Man has all the nations coming to him to serve him. But Jesus says something confusing in Mark 10:45, which is what? The Son of Man, what? Does Mark 10:45 say, guys, we already had somebody read it, quoted this verse quite a bit. Jesus says, I did not come to what? Be served.
But to serve.
Yeah, he says the Son of Man did not come to be served. So, but wait a second. They know their Old Testament. If Jesus is the Son of Man, they know that God has said that all nations are going to serve and worship the Son of Man. Well, now he says, the Son of Man, didn't come to be served. And so they're like, what? How could that possibly be true? You're the king to rule over the nations. And that's true, but the path to do that is not going to be what Jesus is going to go to immediately. What Jesus first has to do is what? What else does he say in Mark 10:45? Before he receives that kind of worship in his kingdom, that type of service from every people, tribe, and language, he has to do what? To not come to be served, but to what? Serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Right? So he says, my role right now, yes, I am the Son of Man. Yes, this is going to be true. But first, to get there, what I have to do is I'm the Son of Man, but I'm also the servant, like Isaiah. I have to go through the suffering. I have to give my life a ransom for many. And that's what causes this to happen. And we'll read in Daniel 9:25 and 26, where it talks about the Messiah will be cut off. He will die. But then he will have a worldwide kingdom. Right? And the missing piece in there, again, is resurrection. Okay? So we've got to move on beyond this, but Daniel lays out then that he explains that Daniel, we can get excited about this vision, but for Daniel, he's very distressed by this vision. Actually, he's distressed by all of his visions. He's alarmed, he's not able to eat because he sees what his people are going to have to go through in the kingdoms of this world before this becomes a reality. And so Daniel is pretty upset. And so he says, he's pretty disturbed. But he sees that the saints in Daniel 7 eventually have victory. They receive the kingdom, and they have victory because they're tied to the Son of Man. Okay, the one like a Son of Man. Okay, and if you notice, just look at Daniel 7:27. It says, then it talks about the last kingdom. It says, then the sovereignty, the dominion, the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale, and I kept the matter to myself. So Daniel is not... I think he's excited about the end goal of God's kingdom, but to get there, he sees that the people of God are going to have to go through great suffering. Okay, in chapter 8, okay, we won't go over it too much, but we get quite a bit of information. Daniel has this vision of another set of beasts, vision of a ram and a goat. Okay, so we get the Persian kingdom, we get the Greek kingdom in Daniel chapter 8, and then there's going to be kind of this preview evil king in Daniel chapter 8 who is a horn, but he's a horn from the third kingdom, the Greek kingdom. His name is Antiochus. He comes in the time between the Old and New Testament. During the Greek period, he desecrates the temple, has a pig sacrificed on the altar, worships Zeus in the temple, kills everybody who doesn't stand with him. A lot of Jews say, you know what, fine, we won't worship just our God, we'll worship your God too. So, but then there are people who are loyal who may die for loyalty to God during this time. Okay, so Daniel sees this vision of that gives more details about these other kingdoms, about Persia, about Greece. And it's actually really interesting to read. It's very precise about what will happen to Alexander the Great's kingdom, what will happen to Medo-Persia, and so on. Okay, and then we get Daniel chapter 9, which is a key passage where I'm trying to think of what even to summarize as far as this passage, but let's just call it in Daniel chapter 9, the 70 weeks. Okay, we'll talk about this in a little bit more depth, hopefully tomorrow. But we get here, Daniel is saying he's reading Jeremiah, and he's realizing that the 70-year period is coming to an end. Which means after 70 years, God promised to what? They would be in Babylon for 70 years, but after 70 years, God would allow what to happen? Yeah. return to the land. But Daniel is thinking, he's not just reading Jeremiah, he's reading, he says, and the other books, the other prophets. So he's putting it together with Isaiah, with Moses, and he's thinking, okay, wait a second. Is this where God's going to act, bring the new covenant? Is the Messiah going to come? Are we going to have a new heart? Are we going to have the temple like God described in Ezekiel? Is God's glory going to reign from there and fill the whole earth? Are we going to be the head of all nations like God had promised? And Daniel is answered, no. He's told by the angel, yes, there's going to be a relief. People are going to go back to the land, but for God's plan, there will not just be a period of 70 years, there will be 70 sevens. A time span of 490 years for God to fulfill his entire plan. Okay? And so so Daniel prays this prayer of repentance, but then gets the idea that God's time span is actually going to be longer in this than Daniel anticipated. He thought, okay, we're going to go back, and this is going to be it. The kingdom of God is going to be realized here, but Daniel is going to come to realize, no, God still has a plan of longer time. But he does give, in Daniel 9, this statement of what will take place and the coming of Messiah. We need to look at, in particular, the details here are really given in Daniel 9:24 through 27. Daniel 9:24 through 27 gives this amazing prophecy that basically gives us a start point, and then you can start counting down the years to when the Messiah would come. It's that precise. And the kind of cool thing is that it would line up with when Jesus arrives, when his ministry is, when he arrives, and then also in Daniel 9:25, it talks about that Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. Okay, so it talks about Messiah's death in Daniel 9:25, and then it says after Messiah's death, Jerusalem and the temple will be destroyed. Okay, so putting all that together, what's kind of cool about this fulfilled prophecy relative to Jesus' coming is Daniel says there's going to be, once Jerusalem starts to be rebuilt, there's a decree of that. We know when that took place. You can read about it in Nehemiah 2:1. That's the start point. And then they are going to rebuild the temple, rebuild the city, and there will be 483 years, and then Messiah will be there. Okay? And in Zechariah, he says, once you've built this temple, know that Yahweh has sent me to you, in Zechariah 4:9. So he says, I'm on my way once this work starts. 483 years later is the time period of Jesus. Jesus claims to be the Messiah, is crucified, rises from the dead, but he's rejected. What takes place in 70 AD after Jesus' death? Jesus talks about this in Mark 13 and 14, but he also Matthew 24. The disciples are admiring the temple, and Jesus says, what? Yeah, the temple will be destroyed. So Daniel had said, once Messiah comes and he is cut off, he dies, you will know that that took place because the temple will be destroyed. The temple that they rebuilt is going to be destroyed again. So part of the, if you're talking to somebody who was Jewish and they didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, you could go to Daniel 9:24 through 27 and say, look, it says when Messiah would come, it says that after Messiah was cut off, the temple would be destroyed. Jesus came during that time, claimed to be Messiah, was cut off, and then 40 years later, the temple was destroyed. And so it happened exactly as Daniel said it and as the Gospels describe it. So if Jesus was not the Messiah, there's not another option. Because once the temple was destroyed, you can't prove your family line anymore. No one can. No Jew today knows what tribe they came from with any accuracy because all the records were destroyed. So Jesus is the only option to fulfill being the Messiah. So when they say, well, there's going to be another Messiah, but it wasn't Jesus of Nazareth, Daniel indicates that it has to be. There's not another alternative. So it's actually, you do see in the Bible these fulfilled prophecies that are very precise as far as God sending Jesus. But the thing is here that the disciples won't understand, and that Daniel indicates, but it's not real clear until it happens, is you have the Messiah ruling and reigning over the world, like in Isaiah, but you also have the necessity of the Messiah's going to die. Well, how do you put those two things together? What's the necessary missing piece in there? Yeah, resurrection from the dead, which Daniel 12:2 will talk about. And that's why Daniel talks about they're willing to die being loyal to God because they know that God can resurrect them. So Daniel indicates that, look, yes, it's better to be loyal to God because he can resurrect you and bring his kingdom in the end. And so he will do that through resurrecting the Messiah as the one who will lead the way in that. Okay, so, and all of this you can get from the Old Testament. So if you are talking to somebody who's Jewish or something like that, or even somebody who's just a skeptic, you can point people to Christ through the Old Testament and say this is fulfilled in Jesus. Anyway, okay, so we've got to cut off there for today. You guys go ahead and get packed up to go there.